Thomas, a lot of people have their retirement investments in a fund called Vanguard. It's very popular, that along with Fidelity. The Anonymous Patriots have drilled down on Vanguard because we noticed that the CEO of this humongous group of companies stepped down recently. We right on the tails of this executive order that Trump has put out that's going to round up the folks that are out there with all this corruption. We see CEOs like Schmidt and others leaving their companies. A lot of folks don't know who Bill McNabb is. So if you look in the description box, we have the full article. And so I'd like you to explain to those who haven't read the article, or for those who want more insight, who is this guy? What is his relationship to Vanguard? What does this mean? Give it to him.
Well, Betsy, it's a great article, a new intelligence report that is combined work of the Anonymous Patriots and the Conclave and your team and Americans for Innovation.
Thank you.
We get their help. We get so many statistics that at the end of it, it's
they have an amazing team of researchers.
Legal researchers, financial researchers, people with such experience, and it's shocking. So if you make sure to get a chance to read this, because what we're doing here, this is what we noticed. Dear Betsy said to the Conclave, hey, what about this Vanguard thing? And we're going, yeah, Vanguard, we despise Vanguard. They control $5.4 trillion worth of assets, most of which are in a old boys club called a mutual funds club, where they literally avoid taxes to about the extent of 17%. So everyone who has their money in a mutual fund that is then carried principally through Vanguard is ripping you off because you were supposed to get 17% more of the tax-free money that they make. And so it is a scam. It's like the scam of MERS, the way that they control people's mortgages. This is nothing more than a new gambling, not new, it's an old gambling casino started in 1975 by a big fat lie. There is no way that Vanguard was started at that point because they gained too quickly, like all of the fake companies and corporations, into such mega amounts of money overnight. So no, Vanguard is a fake. And what Vanguard is when you look at the military-industrial complex, which is...
I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you could just slow down a bit. Folks are hearing this and they need to take in your words.
Okay. So the articles you posted, Betsy, on the military-industrial complex... Mm-hmm. They need to take a look at those because you'll be shocked. But what you will notice is that they're a group of the same people and companies, somewhere between 35 to 50 of them. And you can even take the top 20 and you'll see it. And at the very top, that set of companies that own basically all the media, Silicon Valley, the entire military-industrial complex, and all the corporations that get no bid contracts for the military, as well as every single top investment there is. The number one company invested in all of those, Vanguard. Well, how does Vanguard have so much money to invest? Because they have an agreement with the United States government. They basically are an offshore casino. They are a old boys club investment group for mutual funds.
Well, they have the largest position in a lot of major companies. That chart is in the link below, but it's unbelievable how far and deep their reach is.
Vanguard, Fidelity, Roe, all of those, look closely at them. Then let me give you a little picture of the way that it works. You take a company like Blackstone, which was a significant company, but then they turn into, or they branch out into BlackRock. Oh, but when they become BlackRock, they're worth $1 billion more than they were worth as Blackstone. And then BlackRock becomes BlackRock LLC, and they're worth $4 billion. And you say, but wait, they branched off of a company worth $1 billion. And then you see BlackRock Asset Management, and now they're worth $12 billion. And they're a branch of a company that was worth $4 billion. Just follow it through. What you will do in the end is you will want to pull your hair out because it comes back into a closed loop of the same group of investment bankers and brokers. Vanguard is the number one investor in all the banks that are not part of the CIA.
So would there
CIA banks are insolvent. They're smart enough to know that.
So would there be corruption going on in these institutions? I ask. Of course, you look shocked. Of course there would be. So then, is there significance that Bill McNabb is resigning from this very cushy position?
Oh, yes, because bankers and brokers shouldn't be able to also be investors or do what they do because they have insider trading knowledge. They should all be closed down. The system needs to be closed. There should be no such thing as derivatives, betting, banks, and brokers taking bets on whether something will go up and down when they know full well there is no free market and they control whether it goes up and down and
Right,
win.
they rig it.
That's ridiculous. Everybody knows it's rigged. High frequency traders have the advantage over everyone. And who are the high frequency traders? Oh, that would be everything supported by Vanguard. But they are not brokers per se. They are a separate system. There's no other company. Why is it that the one company in America, the biggest company doing this, has its own set of rules? And what they use as their symbol is an old British warship called the Vanguard. There were many Vanguards, but these ships are absolutely the symbol of British imperialism, which, remember, came out of the British East India Company, imperialistic warriors who traded with the sword. That's the reason I love what your team did, putting the...
Well, they're pirates.
They're pirates.
After we researched the article, then I went to go grab the Vanguard logo. I'm looking at that ship going, well, they are pirates. They probably started out that way. I immediately thought of the East India Company, and lo and behold, they're just pirates of the modern age.
They were literally called commerce by the sword. And at one point, both the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company had fleets that were larger than the largest other fleet in the world, which is the British fleet. So remember, America was a fight between the British East India Company in the north of America, when it was the colonies, and the Dutch East India Company, which were bringing slaves to the south and created the industry of tobacco and cotton, because the Dutch were simply the imperialists taking advantage of these new colonies. So we have been underneath the shade and the shadow of these type of imperialistic companies like Vanguard from the beginning. So when you tell me in Wikipedia or anywhere else that this company came out of nowhere, Vanguard, in 1975, that is a lie. It's just like if you tell me J.P. Morgan, who was a clerk for Rothschild Bank, after he crossed the Atlantic was worth millions and opened a bank worth millions. That was to hide the fact that the Rothschilds are behind many of these things. So look closely. When you see Citibank, when you see Chase Manhattan, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, when you see all of them, all the five brokers, all of them, they all are owned in part by Vanguard.
And not to mention...
But Vanguard doesn't tell you how much they pay anybody in their company.
Oh, that's right, they don't.
They are completely allowed by the government to be absolutely illegal in almost every fashion and every possible way that they could be. That smells of the owners of the 12 central banks and the U.S. Federal Reserve.
Thomas, they also own the media.
Oh,
so do you think the media is going to report on them?
It's important to remember that the media, Reuters, was
Good
created as an extension of the Rothschild Bank. And that it was a way at first to gather information. It was their intelligence agency. And later they realized they could control people through basically what we would call yellow journalism by fake news. And they controlled markets. That's how the Rothschilds became filthy rich. They had their pigeons, which could communicate the truth of what was happening between the Rothschilds at the Bank of England and which was the Central Bank of England, and his five sons who were in 5 other major capitals in Europe. And they had pigeons, believe it or not, that told the truth between the Rothschilds, and they invested, and because they were bankers and they had manipulated everybody else who was reading the Reuters report, which is now Reuters Thompson, which is one of our major news sources. 50% of all news comes from Reuters. The other 50% comes from the Associated Press, a big fat lie, another insider group, just like Vanguard.
Just to spoon feed we the people the information that they want us to have, or the disinformation that they want to feed us.
People will tell you that there's no such thing as monopolies, and that of course the government would go after them for RICO and every other violation of antitrust. Wrong. AT&T was a monopoly. It was allowed. They kept all their profits and we paid them. Same for Standard Oil. throughout both wars. Same for all of the big companies. And here's the really big deal. Jeff Bezos right now, remember, Trump has gone after who? Iran, because of the human trafficking and because of civil rights violation and terrorism. He can take Iran down. He can go after Jeff Bezos, which he just did in some of his tweets, saying, why is the U.S. Postal Service paying Jeff Bezos on every package he delivers?
And, that information has been in alternative media for quite some time. And I would wonder, why isn't something being done? This is not fair to the mom and pops that might need to ship, that Amazon gets a break from the U.S. government. Oh, and then you've got Bezos and Amazon getting a contract with the CIA. Just who is Jeff Bezos and Amazon and the Washington Post?
I'm so glad you mentioned Washington Post.
Right. Well, I'm sure that they all cycle up to Vanguard.
Vanguard, I'm sure, owns huge parts. They're the largest owner of stock for Facebook. I don't know the statistics, but I'm certain that they have huge ownership in every one of the major Silicon Valley fake cardboard cutout companies, which were actually created by DARPA, which was, again, supported through U.S. taxpayer money, which then went into private corporations, which were then protected by the U.S. government, and literally by, as you say, get military contracts that are so huge that we basically have to say Jeff Bezos has all of the information that the CIA has. Of course he can access it. It's stupid to think anything otherwise. So, I wonder if Jeff Bezos has the government over the barrel for some reason.
On top of all of this, when you look at this article, you will see how the patents are all distributed. These our patents of good entrepreneurs, innovators, are stolen. And then then these companies take them and run with them, make tons of money.
Ibm Eclipse Foundation.
The IBM Eclipse Foundation, a name you should know. Go ahead.
Basically, the 30 major companies, the largest tech companies in the world, came out of stealing the patents that came from Leaders Technology, which then went into the IBM Eclipse Foundation and was then given out to these companies, which were, in fact, DARPA-started companies. So what we see here is an Eric Schmidt with Google. He went to Google, and the cardboard cutouts of Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they did a little bit of work for DARPA. And then what happens? Then they get millions of dollars of investment, especially from Eric Schmidt, who then made billions of dollars of the fact that he was there before they went public on the stock market. And what did Eric Schmidt really do? He had come out of working other DARPA projects at Bell Lab, at Novell, at Sun Microsoft. And then he goes in and he takes over one of the largest, which was to be very, very, very quickly, one of the largest companies in the world. And then he creates 26 companies out of that company, which are worth huge amounts of money. And there was no money in Google. There never has been. It's a fake. Google doesn't make jack. That is a big, fat fake. But they were the basically venture capital military incubation for what then became the biggest weaponized aspects of cyber technology, like DeepMind, which is the only AI, like Motorola's Atlas robot, which now has been taken over by Boston Dynamics. And so you have Eric Schmidt stepping down from Google. Why? Everyone would say, well, many people have said that it's because he was a pedophile or because this or that.
No. They say he was a womanizer. Like, big deal. Who isn't a womanizer in Congress? He would have to have done a lot more. I say it's about him being prosecuted for crimes that have been committed. I don't know what they are. I'm sure there are many. And he wants to step down out of his position so that he's not touched. And that really bothers me.
He's moving on because Trump is going to create antitrust action against all those companies because they are illegal. They have been protected by Obama. Obama fleeced them by demanding that they give him $2 billion for his presidential library and for his foundation. This will all be found out in the end. We know it now. It's just a matter of how long it will take to arise in this horrible federal system that we have, which is, stacked with 5 million people to do the work of simply supporting the president. That is completely absurd. So what we're seeing with Eric Schmidt is the same thing we saw with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. When the DNC got sued because they absolutely did rig the Democratic primaries. Everyone knows that.
Everybody knows that.
Including Bernie Sanders, who still has not stopped on the campaign trail.
And by the way, let me say, we the people out here know a lot now. So Mr. Michael Horowitz's report better tell me something I don't know. Because if he can't know more than Betsy, I need to get up there and get his job.
Michael Horowitz's report will only tell one thing, and that's who he is, and he's corrupt, and he's in the pocket of Mueller and Comey, and he's one of the worst. But let's go back to Eric Schmidt. Why did Eric Schmidt step down and stayed on the board of Google, but went to a technology position, a technology advisor? That's so he can go to his other 26 companies, which he owns fantastic stock in, and just simply focus on creating basically what I am suggesting is going to be an army of robot warriors. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, when the lawsuit came against her, what did they say? No, the Democratic National Committee is a corporation, and it actually doesn't have to follow any rules, and it doesn't even have to do what it told its people who gave money to it that it said it would do. So, sorry, the Democratic National Committee comes down to, and its fraud, and its campaign fraud, and its horrible rigging of the election comes down to one thing. It's a corporation. The CEO is responsible. She stepped down. There's nothing that can be done.
And that is what infuriates me. When you explain this to me, how can they do this, commit these crimes under their position? They leave that position and nobody can touch them.
Because that's seen as their punishment. They're called the disgrace.
Well, that may be seen from them as their punishment, but I want something more.
Technically, she should have been run out of her office in Florida. She should have been convicted for supporting...
indicted with a trial.
Imran Awan for the Pakistani largest espionage attack on the Democratic National Convention, the DCCC. All of that, of course, was Imran Awan.
That case is off the dockets. Nobody knows where it is.
He's got a freedom shoe on, though. They won't... His lawyer,
Imran Awan has a freedom tracker boot on?
Yes. He went back to court and he said he wants it off because it restricts him because he can only go 150 miles from his house. How about Paul Manafort, who had one on, who couldn't leave his house and he didn't really do anything?
You know what? It's the modern version of the Scarlet Letter, if anyone remembers that in literature. And it's a marker that you're a criminal, or at least you're being in the process of being indicted. I love it. And why should I have to pay for the big prison bills? Just put them in a boot and let them live in that boot the rest of their lives.
Well, when Bill McNabb stepped down, he went to the position of another position on the board, I think president. But we see that all the time. Like when Zuckerberg, good old Mark Dude Zuckerberg, started to be asked questions by the press and all he could give is answers that demonstrated he was an idiot. Well, then they had to replace him with one of the inside DARPA people. And so you see the head of DARPA, went to Google, went to Motorola, and then went to Facebook. Facebook is always included in this path of these evil, what I would call economic terrorists who have the inside track. But Bill McNabb stepped down to just be the president of Vanguard because he's not going to lose any of his stock or anything like that. But why? Plausible deniability. He doesn't want to be held culpable, and so they're going to mix and match what happened on his term of the CEO and what happened on somebody else's term of the CEO. And that happens all the time. That's why a Comey, and that's why a Robert Mueller, when they're not working for the government, being paid next to nothing, go out to rigged CIA banks like HSBC or rigged lawyer firms like Wilmer Hill, and they're paid tons of millions of dollars a year.
They're fixers. They are there to use the law. They weaponize the law, the judicial system, so that we the people do not see justice, and criminals are able to continue their spree.
And what we're seeing is Trump's brilliance. What he has done is he's declared war on all of them, because his recent executive order says anybody doing anything wrong, but we're especially going to focus on anybody who has any association with human trafficking and trafficking for slavery or sex and or human rights violations.
Pedophilia.
That's most of the major companies, most of the top 50 investors in American major companies for Silicon Valley, for news, for the media, for military, also have invested in other foreign countries. So every one of them. Every one of them can be tried. Remember when baby Bush came out and said, I declare a war upon terrorism and anyone who harbors terrorism. He determined secretly who harbored terrorism, you see. So Trump can now, because he was set up with these amazing executive orders that gives him such power, because Obama was doing that for Hillary, he now has the power and he's used it. And his last executive order is the funniest thing I've ever seen. It basically says, I'm coming after each and every one of you criminals. He's kind of like a Batman.
Well, then within days, you see all these resignations. And then now we have January, which is Human Trafficking Month, which has been there for many years. But maybe this year, people can wake up this month in January so that in February, when we hopefully start seeing some arrest in public, that more people will understand what this is about. I want to ask you about the transportation of human beings, and they're transported by truck, by rail, by boat. It's quite profound how this is occurring.
The executive order says any commercial vehicle. They are putting people in these containers that they put on trucks or put on trains.
Airplanes.
Or airplanes or ships. Mm-hmm. And so this means every ship, every airplane, everything whatsoever that has wheels or can move or in any way move. Because why? That's how they're coming in. Because why? It's huge companies that are bringing them in. We pointed out how basically we handed over Cape Canaveral shipping area to non-Americans. We've handed over shipping into this company. We also allow uranium 235, 238 to be shipped in by plane and by boat from Russians. Okay, they're flying nuclear fissile material in planes to America and have been since 1984 with presidential approval. So this is all about the fact that when people say there's a conspiracy of the bankers and brokers or the Rothschilds or behind it all, when you look closely, to a degree, that is exactly right. But if you say it out loud, you're going to be accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But it's actually true. So we have gone to great trouble, not only in the recent article about Vanguard, but also in previous articles about the military-industrial complex, to name who these people are. It's no longer good enough to simply say buzzwords. We have to call them out by name, like Saul Alinsky has taught us. If we want to bring them down, we got to go after individuals, and that's what Trump is doing. We call them out, we show their immorality, we disgrace them, we make them step down before we even indict them, because the justice system is corrupt and they may never be convicted. So we have to go after people for morality's sake. We have to point out who people are, and then we have to do what we can do, which is either we can vote or we can vote with our pocketbook.
Well, we need to support our president as he is moving through this process of rounding up all these folks. And, after we wrote that article, people have been sending in emails saying, wow, they're very concerned because their retirement funds, their investments, they're all, with the Vanguard funds. And what do we do? Now, of course, Thomas and I aren't financial advisors. We're not going to go there. But we want you to pay attention to what we're showing you in this. And then you need to thoughtfully sit down and think what is best for you in your situation.
Well, as we can say, without giving financial advice, Trump said a long time ago, no, yes, I'm not in the stock market. I'd never get in the stock market. It's rigged.
Yeah, he said that while he was running for office, and he hasn't said that since. My belief is because right now we know how that stock market is being rigged, so why not write it and take credit and everything is fine?
Oh, well, he is changing the entire landscape of the world with what's happening in the stock market. And the reason that's happening is because the central banks own 1/3 of the stock, and they can't seem to get out of it. Well, now, what do people who control the stock market do? They drive the price up, sell it high, and buy low. So if you were to listen to Trump and realize it was rigged, you do the same rigging that the big dogs do. There's a way to manipulate it if you're aware.
Okay, and anything else that we should cover in this Pirates of Vanguard?
Well, as I always say, Trump is like George Washington. And what his recent executive order to me is the same thing that got put up by QAnon and supposedly by the Department of Defense. A picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware and without a shot winning the second only battle that he won in the American Revolution, and that was by stealth and surprise, and he used their own 7 deadly sins against them. The reason that he won that battle is the German mercenaries were actually drunk because it was a holiday eve, and they were drunk as a skunk. So he simply crossed the Delaware, walked in, and won. That's what he's doing here again. So we have to see that, in a way, it is an analogy of a new American Revolution. And once immorality is taken out of the military-industrial complex and the banker-broker control of the media,
just the rule of law is brought back,
and the rule of law is brought back by Trump, then we are going to see the phoenix rise from the ashes, and it will be impervious to any other fire.